Hey there, in this video I'm going to show you how I cut out a small section of concrete using just some basic household tools. Well, I did this to access a leak that we had in our pool's plumbing. Similar process can be applied elsewhere in and around the house. The concrete that I need to cut open is exposed pea stone aggregate, 4 inches thick, and I already have my target area marked up. For my job, I'm just going with a small opening of around 12 by 16 inches. The tools I'll be using for this job are pretty standard. I've got a 7¼ inch circ saw with a diamond blade. I've got my 4½ inch angle grinder, also with a diamond blade. And then I used a sledgehammer and a hammer with chisel. Even though my job is small, I did look into renting a larger walk-behind diamond saw, but that was about $100 for a 4-hour rental, so I figured I'll use the tools I have. Since we're going to be working around water, couple of considerations. I'm using a couple of wired tools, so I need electricity going to it. I've got a long extension cord. Obviously make sure that that's not gonna go into the water. One thing to note, if you're gonna be using water around your wired power tools, make sure it's plugged into a GFI so that it can trip if issues arise. While demoing concrete can certainly be fun, it can also be pretty dangerous, so it is important to exercise appropriate safety precautions. Since we're going to have shards of concrete flying around, safety glasses are a must to protect your eyes. I'd also recommend some gloves, not only because we may be touching sharp edges of concrete, but also because we're going to be swinging a hammer and chisel quite a bit, so we want to prevent some blisters. And last, but definitely not least, we need breathing protection. And the reason breathing protection is so important is because when we're cutting concrete, we're going to be creating dust that contains silica, and that is really nasty. If you get it into your lungs, it can cause permanent lung damage. I've got a pretty basic dust mask here. I'm going to be outdoors, plenty of ventilation. I'm also going to be using water to suppress the dust, but it definitely would be a better choice to use a respirator, maybe an N95. That will definitely help protect you better against the dust. If you're going to be doing this indoors, highly recommend something better than just a cheap dust mask. And with that, let's get started. And now just one more quick safety message from my future self. I'd also recommend hearing protection if you're going to be using power tools. I realized after a while of work that my ears were starting to ring. I should have had these on. Okay, we're now ready to get back into it. The first step is to figure out exactly where we're going to cut out. I'm cutting out right above my pool's plumbing, and I don't think I need a ton of clearance in order to make my repair, so I'm just measuring out essentially a 1 foot by 1½ foot rectangle. And since I'm going to be using water as I'm cutting, I ended up just using one of the wax pencils that's often used for tiles. It won't wash away when exposed to water. Down the road, I'll be patching this concrete after my repair is made, so I want to make that process as easy as I can, so I want to make sure I have nice, straight, clean lines. And I even took some measurements across the diagonals to make sure that I'm squared up. My drawn box didn't show up really well on camera, but I was definitely able to see it during my work. With the area marked up, the next step is pretty important. It is to score the outline. I started off by wetting the surface just as a means for some preliminary dust control. And for this step, I had my circular saw with diamond blade equipped. My saw is only capable of a cutting depth of around 2 3/8 inches, and rather than trying to take that out in one single pass, I ended up setting this to about half the depth, so right around a 1¼ inch. And even though I did some pre-wetting of the surface, you can see the dust just kick up as soon as that saw blade starts contacting the concrete. So what I found to be effective was having my hose right next to the blade where I could actually just do a light mist across the blade. It wasn't perfect, but it did 2 things. It helped with dust control, and then even more importantly, it helped keep the blade cool, which will increase its lifespan. Depending on where you are, you may not have access to a garden hose, but you can always use a spray bottle to help cool off the blade, and even a shop vac can really be useful in terms of controlling dust. Here is how the first cut turned out. Even with the textured surface of the pea stone, the diamond blade really did well, cutting smoothly with minimal chipping. And when making my cuts, I made sure that I went slow. I wasn't trying to force the saw blade through the concrete. Just let it kind of work through. And if I started feeling too much resistance, I would back off a little bit. These score marks are really pretty important as they're going to set us up in subsequent steps to help get that clean cutout that we're looking for. So definitely don't want to rush this. After making our initial scores, I was able just to clear away a lot of that cement mud. With the circ saw, I wasn't able to cut all the way to the corners, and that's where this angle grinder really came in handy. I was able to work my way right up into each corner, and this was just some minor touch-up cutting, so I didn't even use the hose as I was making these cuts. And you can see though, we're still kicking up quite a bit of dust, so if this were indoor, probably still would be good to have some form of dust control if using the angle grinder. And when using the angle grinder, definitely want to make sure you have a good grip on it because it does have a tendency to try to run. Definitely don't want to lose control of it. With the first pass now complete, I can adjust my circ saw to maximum depth. This is right around 2 3/8 inches, so still gonna have a long ways to go even after the second pass, with our slab being around 4 inches thick. The second pass was pretty much identical process to the first pass, just using the hose to keep the blade cool and for dust control, and just going slow and steady, not trying to force anything. And then a second pass with our angle grinder to get into those corners. All right, so our rectangle is now cut as deep as I can go between my circ saw, my angle grinder to kind of clean out the corners. Definitely not perfect, but I think this is gonna work for now. I also did go ahead and make a few more score marks across the center of our slab that we're taking out. This will give us a few more spots to be able to hammer our chisel. With our scores complete, it is time to bust out the hammer and chisel. I definitely had unrealistic expectations that the concrete would kind of fall apart at the score marks as I was using the chisel. Really wasn't the case. There's probably still 1.5 inches of concrete below the score marks. The chisel I was using is a pretty old one that I had in my toolbox. I don't know if a sharper one would have brought more success, but the process that I used is I pretty much took the chisel, wedged it into the score marks, and then whacked it with the hammer until it really bit down. And sometimes I'd hit that chisel from an angle until chunks of concrete would pop up, or this happens. As much as a nice refreshing dip in the pool sounded to retrieve my chisel, the water was a brisk 70 degrees and I wanted to keep working on my project. Early on I did take a few whacks with the sledgehammer just to see if I could make any progress, but I was a bit nervous that this would cause breakage outside my score lines, so I ended up going back to the hammer and chisel. And really, it was a fairly tedious process, just trying to find weak spots that I could chip away at. And I would alternate between my hammer and sledgehammer in order to drive the chisel in. Even using time lapse, you can see just how slow of a process this ends up being. But here in a moment, I'll show you some tips that helped me speed this up. Maintaining control of the chisel is a great starting point. Second time. So I was hopeful that this would be a little easier to crack this out once I got it cut. Not so much, but I'm gonna keep chipping away. You'll see on the finished result of this that I did have some chipping around the edges, and that was when I was using the chisel around the perimeter. After I noticed that, I just started chiseling from the inside score marks. At one point, I busted out the hammer drill with a 1/2 inch bit. It took me a while, but I was able to drill all the way through, and I was optimistic it would weaken the area, allowing me to crack through it. But in reality, it ended up being pretty much a waste of time. So I went back to the basics, and this is where I think I really got into a groove and found something that was pretty efficient. After going through multiple different attempts and angles at trying to break this apart, what I'm finding a little more success with right now is going back through with the angle grinder. I've got lots of peaks and valleys here on what I've chipped away so far, but the angle grinder, I can come in at different angles and kind of work through it that way. So pretty much the more that I can get out of there, kind of get that remaining layer thinner and thinner, the easier it should be to break. So the technique that really helped me along the way was using the angle grinder to make small cuts throughout the surface, and then I was able to use the chisel and hammer again to slowly break away chunks. But the angle grinder was key because it was giving me the crevice that I could set the chisel into and hammer away. Jeez. Number 3. And this is a closer look at just coming in at various angles to slice some of the mounds, making it easier to eventually take a chisel to. Number 4. This is where we're at currently. Made a bunch of relief cuts with the angle grinder, and now I'm gonna start chiseling away again. After quite a bit of chiseling and a lot of angle grinding and spraying some water, I really could feel the concrete softening up. It sort of turned into a muddy paste in spots. It definitely became much easier to sink the chisel in. Number 5. So it's been about a couple hours, just really chipping away though. That's kind of the name of the game. And I do feel fortunate. This was all outdoors. I was generating a ton of dust as I was angle grinding. If I were indoors, I would definitely be considering a better means for dust suppression. And even though the chisel had been knocked into the pool a few times, I'd much rather that than having it fly at me. I guess I maybe should have considered shin guards for protection, or maybe even just a pair of pants. But the show must go on, so I definitely took caution as I was hammering away at the chisel, just to make sure that I wasn't going to be in the line of fire as I was swinging away. After what felt like an eternity of grinding and chipping, it all paid off. Finally broke through. We have a hole now going down into the dirt. I'm hoping the rest of this process is going to go much quicker. I would say the angle grinder though, that was the MVP of this job. And really once I busted through, it became a much simpler process. A lot of hammering, a little bit of angle grinding, and I was able to open this up within a matter of minutes to get the access I needed to the plumbing line down below. Like any demolition, there's obviously gonna be a mess afterwards, so I was able just to scoop up the concrete, put it in a bucket, and because we're outside, easy enough just to spray the surrounding area off with the hose sprayer because there was definitely a lot of concrete dust and mud that had been dried to the patio. So here it is all cleaned up. We can see the outline of the hole. I didn't really worry too much about cleaning up the edges in here. I'll do that if I need to get more clearance as I locate the line down there. A couple notes. My angle grinder did go ahead and kind of run away a little bit and got a nick there. And then as I was trying to use the chisel and hammer along the edges initially, I found that I was actually breaking off some of the edging that I was hoping not to break off. So that's where I feel like if I would have just started kind of with the angle grinder a little bit more, I would have had better scores and probably could have avoided that. Overall, this process took a couple hours to get our nice cutout finished up. Once I started using the angle grinder a bit more, things definitely sped up. So if I have to do this again, I will be taking more advantage of the angle grinder. After getting the access hole in the concrete, I was able to confirm the leak that I've been dealing with for quite a while. So I was able to make a quick repair, but even after the repair, I found I still had a leak. After confirming I was at the other return jet, it was time to do this all over again. I ended up following very similar process as the first go around, with one main difference here. I created a ton more initial relief cuts using just the circ saw going in different diagonals, pretty much creating a crosshatch pattern before doing any chiseling. And I found that creating all those relief cuts gave me many more options as far as where I want to place the chisel and allowed me to break out larger chunks at a much faster rate than the first go around. And once I broke down enough of the top layer, I was able to take the sledgehammer, break through into the dirt, and then clear out the edges pretty quick. While the first hole took me over 2 hours, This one took me about an hour and 20 minutes. And with this hole, I did spend a little more time cleaning up the edges to get a better finished look. So hopefully you found this video useful in how to cut a hole into concrete in a somewhat controlled way using household tools. And if you're interested in seeing how I patched this hole after getting the leak repaired, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, because I'm gonna have a video showing the process. I'll see you next time.